Well, welcome to the last lecture in the security engineering course for undergraduate year 4 and MPhil, and also a distinguished guest lecture. We're delighted to welcome in Edinburgh Dr. Ian Levy, who is the Chief Technical Officer of the National Cybersecurity Centre. That's the part of GCHQ which deals with domestic defence, as I'm sure Ian will tell you. Because security engineering is about fixing real problems in the real world. And from his viewpoint, Ian, I think, sees more problems than many others. Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Ross. Hi, everyone. Seriously, audience participation. Hi, everyone. Thank you. So I'll talk for maybe 45 minutes, think of questions. There will be things I say that you disagree with. That is the point, right? I'm going to start off just talking a little bit about the NCSC, so what we're here to do, why we're set up. I'll talk a little bit about why I think cybersecurity is basically broken, and I'm going to use 5 examples to try and explain in a bit more detail. Okay? So, as Ross said, oh, come on. There we go. We're part of GCHQ, so part of one of the UK intelligence agencies, and look, I'm allowed to come out and use my real name. Right? We're trying to be different, trying to be a different sort of agency. That's our building in London. It's awesome. It's very cyber. Right? We don't have the whole thing. We've only got 2 floors, but it's very cyber. The reason that's important is because it's not behind 20 feet of razor wire. It does not have guards with guns walking around. Right? Because if you're trying to help fix real-world problems, real-world people have to be able to come talk to you, it turns out. And 20-foot of razor wire, guards with guns, does not engender trust in people. Right? So we're trying to be different. When we set the NCSC up, we said 3 things. We're going to do everything based on science, as far as we can. Right? So where there is data, we will use it. Everything we put out will have an evidence base behind it, even if we don't publish it. And we will do our damnedest to be transparent, right? To explain why we're doing things and why we think certain things. I'm going to go through these 5 examples. We'll hopefully try and demonstrate some of that. When you set up a new agency, we were set up in 2016. When you set up a new agency, you want a quick win. Right? You want to know everybody to know you really quickly. This is something called the Carbuncle Cup. Right? It is the award that's given every year for the worst architecture in the UK. And the building won it. Okay? It's not the best thing. What really, really annoyed me, though, that came second. Seriously. Right? So, anyway, let's talk about engineering for a bit. Why don't planes have square windows? Hands up if you know. Anybody? Awesome. That's the first. You don't count. First time I've not had anybody who knows this. So if you look around the world, almost all windows that you see are square or rectangular. They all have corners, apart from aeroplanes, which have these squarish windows. The reason is back in the 50s, the de Havilland Comet 1, which was one of the most popular planes at the time, had a habit of exploding in midair, which is a bad thing for an aeroplane to do. And eventually they found some wreckage for one of the crashes in a place called Elba in Italy. And they looked at the bit of fuselage they had, and they looked at the corners of the windows, and they saw diagonal stress fractures, where the windows would basically split the fuselage. And as soon as you see it, you go, oh, don't, stupid, how could I miss that? Right? What did they do? So this is the same as finding a vulnerability in a fielded cyber system, right? In a fielded IT system. What did they do? What would we do in cybersecurity? We'd get a new name, we'd do a cool icon, we'd set a website up, and we'd run around with our hair on fire, right? Because that's how you do cybersecurity today. What they did back in the 50s was they took a de Havilland Comet 1, they stuck it in a big tank, and they filled the tank with water and drained it 1,500 times to simulate the cycle count of the thing taking off and landing. And they observed causally, oh look, stress fractures. Okay, so now I've proved that the vulnerability is caused by the thing I think it is. Then what did they do? Because again, we would run around and go, stop using square windowed aeroplanes. Right? That would be the cybersecurity response. Every aeroplane had square windows. So what's an appropriate response? An appropriate response is go, we should probably check to make sure that the stress fractures aren't about to pop the windows out at 27,000 feet. We should probably put buttresses around them to make them a bit stronger. We should definitely inspect them more often, manage the harm. But more important than all of that, we should not build planes with square windows anymore. Right? You change the design criteria so you remove the vulnerability. If you do that, you can have systemic harm reduction. So this is proper harm reduction, and that's really what we're on about when we talk about security. Right? You're trying to stop a harm happening. Broadly speaking, right, and I know I'm doing this in front of a bunch of academics, so please don't shoot me for it. Broadly speaking, the top line is your chance of dying when you chance of crashing when you get on an aeroplane line. And broadly speaking, the one at the bottom is how often are you going to survive that? Right, so over those 35 years, these are Western-built airframes, by the way, your chance of being in an accident when you get on a plane has gone through really, really down a lot. And your chance of survival, relatively, is higher. Right, that's a good thing. So that's what you can do if you do proper systemic harm management. I'm going to talk about the 2008 financial crash. Right, there are 5 financial instruments that caused the 2008 financial crash, or major cause of the 2008 financial crash. I'm going to go through them quickly. So the first one's called mortgage-backed securities. Okay, that's cool. Agreed? It's got the word secure in it, so it must be good. And it's backed by a mortgage, so somebody's house is at the end of it, so I've got a physical asset I can go play with. Yeah, everybody agree? Yes? Seriously, audience participation, nod. Prove you're not asleep. Collateralized debt obligations. Collateralized sounds good, I've no idea what it means. And there's an obligation on my debt. Still good, all fine. If somebody defaults on my credit, I can swap it. So I'm still okay, maybe? That doesn't sound great. Subprime debt doesn't sound good. Toxic debt. Nah, don't want that. Right, so you would be forgiven for investing in the first one. You would be a moron to invest in toxic debt. Agreed? Yeah? They're all the same thing, packaged very slightly differently. The way you talk about risk, the way you talk about things, changes your perception of risk. Right? So if you talk about mortgage-backed securities, people are going to immediately go, that sounds like a decent thing. I'll invest in it. You go and say, do you want to buy some toxic debt? Hands up if you want to buy some toxic debt. Anybody? No? You see what I mean? It's a it's a human thing. It's a human response, but it's really important in risk. This is how we do cybersecurity today, through marketing, right? The, 5G cyber quantum AI blockchain. If anybody wants to buy one, I have them in the boot of the car. Right? People buy stuff based on on its title today, because there's no data out there. There's no way of assessing whether something is useful in the context you want to use it in today. We have to change that. Right? At the end, I'm going to talk about reliance on technology. So think about how much you rely on technology today. Right, Sam, I've no idea where Sam is, but he's managing to record this, hopefully making me look a bit slimmer as well, Sam, if you get a chance. But, 10 years ago, that would have been a pipe dream. Pandemic, the fact that, Ross has got a Mac, I've got a Windows box, and we can still talk over video, that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. Right, think about the dependence, because we're going to come back to it. Think about your dependence on technology in your everyday lives and how it's changed over the last decade. We have to fix this. Okay, I'm going to start having a Hollywood now. The hoodie hacker surrounded by floaty green JavaScript. Right, everybody's seen one, right? What is the title that goes underneath this? Somebody's got to shout it out. Come on. APT, shout it out. No, the advanced persistent threat. They are advanced. They are persistent. They are threatening. Right? That's kind of scary. Right? If you're sat at home and you see that and you go, this is what you're trying to defend yourself against so you can do online banking, that's kind of scary. Okay, pop quiz time. First Hollywood representation of a cyber attack. Shout them out. Come on. War Games. Excellent. Anything earlier? Hackers was definitely after War Games. Definitely. The IMSAI 8800, the box that you use, that's an awesome little box. Anybody? We go back further? Who wants to guess the year? God, you're not playing, are you? Seriously. It was the Italian job. And the uber hacker in the Italian job was Benny Hill. Now, I get that this is not audience appropriate because none of you were around when Benny Hill last was on TV, thank God. Swapping tapes in the traffic management system in Turin to cause gridlock so he could rob some gold. Right? Basically the same thing. Right? That's how we started talking about cyber attacks. Benny Hill. The problem is when you talk about stuff like this, I'll let you read this while I'm talking. When you talk about cyber attacks in this way, people forget why they're doing things. And so you end up taking every single tool in the toolbox and throwing it at a problem because you've no idea what the actual problem is anymore. Okay, you either read slowly or have no sense of humor. It's one of the two. Finished? Okay, no, too slow. So here's what I think should go under here for APTs, right? So we are the National Incident Response Organisation for the UK. So when there is something that's nationally affecting, a cyber incident that's nationally affecting, we respond. We do about 750, 770 a year on average. For everything that I have seen, broadly speaking, they are adequate pernicious toe rags. Like they are adequate because they're not super clever. They're not using 0 days like they're going out of fashion. They're using password 123. Pernicious because, yeah, okay, it's bad, but the things that they're doing today, most of them are just pernicious. And toe rags is the least sweary word I can think of that begins with a T, so we'll stick with that. But what you've ended up with for cybersecurity is this. So most cybersecurity is based around fear today. Right, look at the marketing that cybersecurity companies use. Right? It is literally, they're coming to get you. Only we can protect you. That really hurt my throat. I'm not carrying on. Only we can protect you. You, O populace, are far too stupid to understand this nasty threat thing. Only we can protect you. $29.99 a month. Right? That is the marketing cybersecurity does today. Right? And if you do that, you're driven by fear. And in the end, cybersecurity is all about risk management. Okay? And for risk management, fear is your enemy because you don't make rational decisions. One of the things that we did when we got set up was say, actually, a huge number of attacks against the UK, against people in the UK, are just like stealing 20 quid off people, or stealing a few hundred quid off people, or nicking their password to something, to Netflix. Can we fix that? So we set up this thing called the Active Cyber Defense Program, and we publish the data every year. So the new one, the 5th year of data will be published in May. We've done things like take the hosting. So UK hosting of malicious stuff has gone from 6% of global hosting to 1% of global hosting. Right, so we only host 1% of global bad stuff now. HMRC, so the tax authority in the UK, because you go where the money is, used to be the 3rd most fished brand in the world. And now it's about 150th. Right, people are not attacking the UK. Criminals are not attacking the UK in the same volume and to the same extent they were when we started this. Right? And you can look at the data and you can go, actually, you've misanalyzed this data, you're an idiot, here's why you're wrong, which would be great, send email. Or you can go, actually, this kind of works and we should scale some of these things. Right? So what we're trying to do here is take the burden away from people. Everyday people, 66 million people, how do I take the burden away from them? Right? That's how we start to fix cybersecurity. Right, first example. It's the legacy that will kill you. Right, how many of you have written production code yet? Anybody? 1, 2, 3, 4. Ross doesn't count. So four people have written production code. How long do you think it's going to be in service? Rough guess. Just shout out a number. Wow, okay. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, it's interesting. Who knows what buffer overflow is? Hands up if you know what buffer overflow is? I really hope they've taught you buffer overflows. Seriously. So this is the first public exposition of a buffer overflow as a security problem that I can find. Okay? Hands up if you, again, audience part, please help me with this one. Hands up if you think it's Windows. Hands up if you think it's Linux. So 3. Hands up if you think it's VMware. Hands up if you think it's something weird. None of you are playing my game, are you? This is terrible. Seriously. It was something called GCOS. Right? And that report is a public report from 1972. So the first time we had buffer overflows as a security problem in public was 1972. That's 50 years ago. And for the 50 years that followed that, we've said to people, write better code. Today, buffer overflows and similar things, memory safety errors, are among the most prevalent vulnerabilities that lead to security problems in the world, even today, 50 years. So going around telling people, write better code, turns out doesn't work. Who knew? 1996, hacker called Aleph1 publishes this, Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit, hence the name of the talk. Publishes this in FRAC, which was awesome. It's basically a recipe for how you exploit buffer overflows. Right? And again, it's public. Right? So what's that? That's 1996. So that's a few years ago. Right? I'm a mathematician. I'm not supposed to be able to add up. 1996, and we're still telling people from 1996 onwards, write better code. Still doesn't work. Who remembers WannaCry? Yeah, the big worm that attacked everybody. Who knows what the vulnerability was? Anybody seen it? One person, yeah? 2 people. Okay, here is a reconstruction, my reconstruction of the code that contains the vulnerability. Spot the vulnerability. You've got 30 seconds. No, you haven't, I'm joking. So this is an extra, this is, I say, it's a reconstruction from the machine code of the bit of Windows, the SMB server in Windows that was exploited, okay? Windows is maybe 100 million lines of code. How are you going to spot the vulnerability in 100 million lines of code when you can't spot it in 10? The vulnerability, by the way, is that cast. Those 9 characters cause WannaCry. Enabled WannaCry, to be fair. Right? So telling people to look at code also doesn't work. You know, all this stuff about, well, many eyes make for secure code, only if there's a brain behind them, and only if you're asking them to do sensible things. Asking 30 people to look at 100 million lines of code and say, find the vuln, isn't going to work, ever. Automating it isn't going to work, ever. I believe you are taught about this. Sherry and Rems. Yeah? So hardware augmentation, strong typing for standard processors. Right? It's awesome. It also fixes a whole bunch of memory safety errors. Now, governments are not useful for many things. One thing they are useful for is shifting a market where there's no commercial incentive. So there's this thing called the Digital Security by Design program, where government sticks a chunk of cash into big problems to try and have them fixed. One of them that we're trying to have fixed is implementing Cherry and Rems at scale in commercial processors with tool chains. So if you haven't heard of it, the Morello program, it's a type of cherry. Funny, huh? Techies are so funny. The ARM Morello program is part of the funded work by Digital Secure by Design to build an ARM processor that embodies Cherry and Rems, or the capabilities anyway, along with a set of tool chains so that any code monkey can use it. Right? You do not have to have done this course to understand how to use strongly typed memory. It just works. Takes away a whole, assuming it works, that's what the next 3 years are about, you take away an entire class of vulnerability. So instead of telling people to write better code, you fix the underlying problem. A processor shouldn't be able to do a buffer overflow. There is no logic to it. Right? We could have fixed it 30 years ago. We didn't, because when you fix it, none of the software you currently use works. Now, I think that's a good market, right? Because you start to be able to say, government, we will not buy your stuff if it doesn't work on a processor like this. If you can't compile your code so it's memory safe, I don't want it on my system because it's rubbish. Right? So how do you start to shape a market around a technology like this to fundamentally change security? Make sense? Audience interaction's terrible, isn't it? Now, I know for a fact none of you will get this. I think possibly Ross and I are the only people old enough in the room to remember this. This was an Oracle claim. 2002, Oracle, the big database vendor, stood up and said, Oracle 9i is unbreakable. Can't break it, can't break it. You can see what's coming, can't you? This is not a hard thing. You know, marketing people shouldn't be allowed to do technology. Does anybody think that's a remotely sensible thing to say about anything? Forget technology, just anything. Would you ever say that about anything? Cannot be a sensible thing to say, and yet a massive company decided to put their reputation behind it. So that was 2002. In 2002, not long after they said that, a guy called Dave Litchfield, who's a UK security researcher, went, you might want to cross the "un" out. Because he found a huge number of buffer overflows in Oracle 9i. My favorite one, which was the one he started with, was the one that was on an externally facing service, unauthenticated externally facing service. So if you can engender a packet on the wire to the database server, you own it. That is not my definition of unbreakable. It's not even my definition of decent, right? So you've got a marketing department saying something, you've got a security researcher coming out and going, duh. Here's the funny bit. CESG, which is the thing at the top up there, you can't see it. Ooh, weird. CESG was a precursor organization to the NCSC. And we ran a thing called Common Criteria along with 28 other countries. This is the certificate for Oracle 9i, signed by one of my staff, saying it passed EAL4. And the EALs went from 1 to 7, 7 being like properly good, 1 being just okay. So 4's in the middle, and that's what everybody went for. What does it mean? Anyone want to hazard a guess what it means? Anybody? I'll give you a hint.
They ran a scan? They ran a scan against it?
No. That'd be far too useful. The comment was, ran a scan. No. So this is back in 2003, remember? You know, scanning is hard. In tiny, tiny letters just above the signature, it says, certification is not a guarantee of freedom from security vulnerabilities. Really? Who'd have guessed? What is the certification then? So it's not telling me it's secure. What's it telling me? What it's actually telling me, if I'm totally honest, is Oracle paid a lab to look at some documentation and say, yeah, the documentation means you're awesome. Well done. Maybe they looked at a few hundred lines of code. No idea if they were the code from the database or not, but they looked at some code. Right? The point of this, incidentally, we have formally withdrawn from Common Criteria for this reason. The point of this is around incentives. So if you think about the model that I've just described, so a vendor going to a lab and a lab coming to us and going, this is awesome, boss, you should sign it. Right? What's the incentive for the lab? Shout it out, come on. What's the incentive for the lab?
Get paid.
Get paid. How does a lab get paid? Does a lab get paid? So if you're a vendor and you go to Ross's lab and you give them £100,000 and they come back 6 weeks later and go, your product is a bag of spanners, take it away and never darken my doorstep again, are you ever going to go back? No. If they go, well, if you set your scope of evaluation like this, you'll probably pass and we can tweak this, that and the other. If you just do those little things, you're good. Would you pay 100 grand for that? Yeah, of course you would. And so the incentive of vendor-funded labs, the incentive model is fundamentally broken. You're never going to get good security out of that. So, what do you do instead? We published these last year. This is our idea for how you do security assurance in the future. Right? So this is all on our website. What do we want to do? Well, I want to get principles. I want a principle that says, this vendor knows how to do component management, for example. Right? What's the artifacts that I need as a user of that to be able to consume that and make a decision? Right? Because the certificate has a side effect of absenting the user from a need to think. Right? So we're trying to fundamentally change how assurance is done for security products. Right? I've no idea if it will work. It should do. We think it works, but we need to test it over the next few years. Right? And it's not whether we can use it or not. It's whether a bank can use it, or a hairdresser can use it, or my granny can use it. That's much more important because they're the actual customers for this, not me. I'm giving high quality risk information to people so they can make risk decisions. Make sense? Wow. Okay. This is the killer, right? So I'm going to talk about 5G and telecoms. Now, the debate around 5G security and whether Chinese companies should be allowed to participate in the global market ended up talking about magic, right? And I'll get to that in a second. But for me, this is an example of, it's one of the examples about how the public narrative degrades into a cartoon of itself, right? So I will now give you some quotes that were said. The first one was this: bad actor in your 5G system can crash autonomous vehicles, can take out power grids. Okay, they didn't actually say eat your firstborn, I added that, but they may as well have done, right? Who's going to get, hands up if you've got a car. Yeah, I'm not tuned in with my audience today. Theoretically, if you had a car and you were buying one that had automated driving, so ADAS system, right? Would you buy one that would only be safe if it had a mobile phone signal? No. The reason for me is because you could never drive up the M4. Right? So how can it possibly be true that a 5G system can crash an autonomous vehicle? Because then you've designed the autonomous vehicle wrong, right? If your autonomous vehicle is such that, you know, somebody sending it bad data makes it crash, it's not safe. It shouldn't be on the road. So that was number one. Number two, it takes just one device in a 5G network because it's all software and it's all virtualized. One device is the end. If a Chinese actor owns one device, they own your entire network. So let's just unpack that. Hands up if you've seen a mobile phone mast around. Yeah, they're big phased array antennas on top of buildings, on big stilts. Right? They are macro cells. Now, the thing with 5G is you're trying to get much, much more data to people. The problem with that is you need much, much more power. And if you try and do 5G data rates at scale with just macro cells, you end up needing a small nuclear reactor at the bottom of every base station, which doesn't scale. And so you use small cells instead, right? And these small cells might be in the buildings, like there'd be one in here, say. They might be at the top of lampposts or bus stops. That statement is exactly the same as nobody may touch a base station because I can unplug it, plug my laptop in, it's exactly the same attack. Agreed? So that statement that says one compromised device on my network means the network is compromised is the same as saying my national security is dependent on nobody shimmying up a lamppost. Does that sound like a sensible statement? No, right? And it was made by people who had no clue what they were talking about. Literally no clue. Slight diversion. 2018, Foreign Secretary stands up and says, nationally Russian GRU have been attacking UK networks. Bad people, stop it. Happens. Earlier in 2018, well, same day, that's April 2018, we put out a thing on our website that said, nasty Russian GRU attacking UK telecoms networks. Here's how they're doing it. Here's what to look for. Here's how to fix it. Right? Everybody in the UK runs around with their hair on fire. It's the Russians. They're coming to get me. Right? Hold that thought. A year previous, in August 2017, we put this out that said, somebody is attacking network devices in the UK. Here's how to spot them. Here's how to fix it. Almost nobody did anything. You go around and poke them and go, have you read this? Like, yeah, it's not me though. It's fine. It's like, have you checked? It's not me. It's fine. Fine. A few months before that, in May, we published this thing that went, hey, theoretically, people could attack network devices in the UK, and here's how they might do it, and here's how you might spot it, and here's how you might stop them. Nobody paid any notice at all. It's the same guidance. It's the same advice. One says, maybe. One says, we see it, but we're not telling you who. And the other one goes, it's the GRU. Right? The response to those three things were fundamentally different. So again, this is how you talk about things fundamentally changes people's reactions. So you've got to be careful of that. The other one was Chinese state attacking managed service providers to go and get their customers. Right? So both of these are the Russian state going after a telecoms network to get their customers, Chinese state going after a managed service provider to get their customers. Okay? Hold that thought. 2018, DCMS, the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, who is the policy lead for telecoms, because telecoms and football go together well, obviously, kicked off a supply chain review. And the review was basically trying to ask 3 questions. 1, does the market support telecom security? Number 2, do the vendors support telecom security? And number 3, should we use things like Huawei? Okay? We did a lot of work behind this. So one of the things we did was a proper analysis of telecom security. This is a blog I wrote which describes, hopefully accessibly to people, how we think about telecom security. So it's got the thing about, shimmying up a lamppost should not be the limit of my national security, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff in there about trying to explain to people how you actually attack it. Linked off that is this, which is a summary security analysis of telecoms networks. That's about, I think it's about 45, 50 pages, something like that. The real one is about 200. And the thing for me is, I don't think anybody has ever done that before. So I don't think anybody's ever started from scratch and said, how do you actually attack a telecoms network? Just started making random statements. When we did it, so attack trees, threat trees, yeah? All know those? Somebody please not, seriously. So we did big attack trees and threat trees. There's 143 different attack vectors for a generic telecoms network. Okay? One of them is your vendor is evil. The other 142 are vendor independent and you should worry. Okay? This is an eye chart. You're not supposed to be able to read it. Don't worry. The red ones are the ones to worry about. Okay? They are threats, risks, attack vectors, whatever you want to call them, that really, really, really need mitigating because the impact's huge. The 4 things around the outside, so pre-positioning, national dependence, network disruption, espionage, are kind of the cartoon goals that the attacker's trying to get, right? And then the different sectors there, each one is an attack vector. And the ones we've labeled are some scary ones. Top left, compromise of a managed service provider. We've just seen that on the previous slide. Credential loss, compromise of admin workstation, those 2 at the top left. That's how the Russians were getting in, if you read the advisory we put out. Malicious insider, blah, 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 right? So you can see there's a bunch of stuff to fix. Not a single one of them says your vendor's nationality is important, right? These are vendor independent. These are things that anybody can use to attack a telecoms network today. Okay, I really do want audience participation for this one bit, please. Hands up if you have broadband at home. Please, please. I don't believe anybody's going to keep their hand down. Right, I'm going to give you an option, right? You're going to move to a new broadband provider. Broadband provider number 1 will give you a document that explains the security of the MPLS PE node that serves the edge that delivers your broadband. That's number 1. Number 2, free Netflix. Which one do you want? Who wants number 1? Literally nobody. Seriously, not even I want number 1, and I'm a lunatic. Nobody wants number 1. Security doesn't pay. So there's no incentive for operators to do security because nobody buys it, which means there's no incentive for vendors to build better products because operators don't buy them, right? The regulation that we had in the UK at this time, the regulator is called Ofcom. And basically, Ofcom's security role was if you as an operator had an outage that affected more than maybe 10,000 people for maybe a couple of hours, then Ofcom could come and look. And if Ofcom found that you were a complete muppet, they could fine you 500 grand. 500 grand doesn't buy you anything on a national telecoms network, not a single thing. And so everybody went, take the risk, pay the fine, it's fine. What has just gone through Parliament and has got through is something called the Telecom Security Act. The Telecom Security Act fundamentally changes the regulation. The regulation is now, we're going to tell you how to run a network. That's what this is. It's out for consultation at the moment. Feedback is welcome. Right, it's on the gov.uk website. It's awesome. This is a lawyerification of the threat model that was behind that diagram I just described. Ofcom can rock up whenever they want and go, hi, I'd like to see your security, please. I'd like to see that you're meeting this standard. If they find you wanting, the maximum fine is now 100 grand a day that you're out of compliance, or 10% of your global turnover, right? Every chief exec of every telecoms company in the UK went, ooh, should probably do something now. So now I've got an incentive for security. Agreed? Seriously, go read this. It's awesome. I mean, I'm biased, I accept. But the other bit I said was, the vendors all build rubbish. And so how do you change the vendor approach without building another scheme that's like common criteria, right? Where you've just got a bunch of labs being paid to write nonsense for people to consume who don't care, right? The document we published last week is called the Vendor Security Assessment, and it says, we think vendors should do these things, and the evidence of them doing this thing should look like this. So a vendor should have a decent software component management system. Right? If you have a decent software component management system, you should never find a piece of software, a component in your product that's more than, say, a few weeks out of date. Yeah? Make sense? And there's subtlety around that, but broadly speaking. One of the things in here is at the bottom there. The private paper-based assessments performed under the GSMA's NESAS scheme are not appropriate. NESAS is a spin on common criteria done by the industry. And NESAS works like this. I'm a telecoms vendor. I go to one of my labs. I pay them a bucket load of money. They look at some documents for 3 days, and they give me 20 letters back. Right? 20 categories, and it's either pass or fail in each category. That's it. That's what gets published. I have no idea what the hell that means. I have no idea how to consume that to make my risk management better. So we've done something else. I am a very, very big fan of the point and laugh strategy. Right? So the point and laugh strategy is exactly what it says. Right? You set people up, and they can either succeed or fail. And if they fail, and they fail for a stupid reason, you point and you laugh at them publicly. So what we're doing is saying the easiest way for vendors to satisfy the Vendor Security Annex is to publish how they do it. So this is Cisco's. This is on Cisco's website. It's a 12-page document that says, here's all the ways that we meet that vendor security thing that I just showed you. Now it's published on Cisco's website. So it's kind of their reputation on it. So if some security researcher comes along and goes, I just picked up an ASR 1000, and it turns out it's got OpenSSL from 1996 in it, they're going to look pretty bloody stupid. And because that's public, and the Vendor Security Annex is public, security researcher can just publish it in a responsible way, obviously. But there's nothing to say there's a security problem that you can't publish it. And so instead of building another sort of self-licking ice cream scheme, we're trying to use this public embarrassment to get people to do the right thing. If this works, the next thing I want to do is say, if you want to sell anything to government, anything, then you have to publish a thing on your website that says, my corporate network uses two-factor authentication, and none of my admins browse the web on their admin account. Right, publish those two things. That takes away a decent number of incidents from me. Right? And because government spends so much money, that has a market effect. Right? So this is still all about market. Right? If you're doing security engineering, you have to engender a market for the thing you're building. Who has the NHS contact tracing app? Who has it actually turned on? Oh, I forgot about that. Damn. I had to put a mask on the train on the way up, actually. It doesn't actually matter. Same problem. So this was the first blog that I put out about the English contact tracing app. And it was trying to explain to people how digital contact tracing works, why it was slightly different to normal contact tracing, but how we were building the system with security in it. Yeah? Happy? Good. Who remembers this debate? Centralized versus decentralized, right? This is, again, a cartoon of the problem. So this was about the cryptography design that was used. Right? It was used to say a whole bunch of things about government can or cannot build a contact graph, government can or cannot identify you, government can or cannot come and eat your firstborn. Right? But in the end, it was a crypt design. Right? The problem is, those two cryptographic designs enable you to do two fundamentally different epidemiological models, right? And the one we started off with, which was a centralized one, allowed you to do the epidemiological model, allowed you to execute the epidemiological model that SAGE was using to advise government. Right, it's called the Oxford BDI model. The decentralized one does not allow you to do that. Okay, so it's not an academic thing about privacy. This is a balance between, okay, you're going to have to trust these three entities, bits of government or bits of the NHS to not be complete morons in order to do these extra things that you can do with the Oxford BDI model. Does that make sense? So the cryptography, which was designed around a very particular thing, led to a restriction on the epidemiological model we could use. Right? Does that sound okay? Doesn't sound okay to me, because this is a health problem. Right? And there's a balance to be had, and the debate was never had properly. The other thing that was weird was the real problem was Bluetooth. So Bluetooth Low Energy as a ranging protocol sucks. Right? It really, really sucks, and we'll show you why in a minute. But this part of the blog is about the early Google Apple EN API. So it's just after we switched to EN API, and it basically says, if you're kind of 1.5 meters to sort of 5 meters away from people, it's a coin toss as to whether you're going to get pinged or not. That's not good enough. For something that's going to deprive you of your liberty, that is not good enough. There's then a link to a blog by a guy called Mark Bryars, who was at the Alan Turing Institute at the time, was leading some of the modeling work for the NHS, saying, here's 3-4 things that I've got to do that I think might make this better, right? So that I can actually have some confidence that when it says you've been too close for too long, it's probably true. Here's why it sucks. So this is one of our internal tools, and we modeled a train carriage, and there's 4 people in the train carriage. One has the phone on the desk in front of them, one has a phone to their ear, one has a phone in their pocket, one has in their jacket pocket, one has their phone in their back pocket. And as you walk down the train carriage past them, that's the ray trace of the multipath effect for one BLE signal. Right? How the hell are you supposed to make sense of that? By having 3 values that are averaged over 15 minutes. You can't. Right? And so again, the drive for optimizing one variable, so privacy in this case, led to a bad outcome in terms of the health outcomes. In the end, a bunch of very smart people published this paper and said, here is an end-to-end model using unscented Kalman smoothing, which allows us to take multiple BLE RSSI signals and turn it into a reasonably accurate predictor of risk, not a predictor of distance. They're very fundamentally different things. We're not trying to measure distance, we're trying to measure risk. I'm not building a phone detection app, I'm building a risk app. In the end, this is what got added to the global system, the Apple-Google system, some version of this. And so the version we use now is much more robust than the version that started off. But think about all the different things that could have gone wrong during the period where the optimization wasn't right for the national problem. The other thing I was going to talk quickly about before I get onto my last example is the more general COVID-19 threat and what we did about it. So this is a picture from our annual review. We publish an annual review every year saying what we've done. This talks about what we did for the vaccine supply chain security. So think about what's involved in making a vaccine. So you've got some really smart researchers. Yep, Oxford University, for example, AstraZeneca, for example, and a bunch of others. Really smart people. Okay, so AstraZeneca probably knows how to protect themselves. Oxford University probably should. So that's probably okay. You go down the supply chain and you end up with a company with less than 10 people whose particular product is absolutely critical to the creation of the vaccine. So less than 10 people in a company. Is it rational and reasonable for me to go to them and go, I'm really sorry, but because we've got a useful vaccine and you're part of it, every other country in the world is going to come and steal your stuff. Sorry, you should probably fix it. Bye. Is that a reasonable thing to say to a 10-person company? Of course it's not. So what we did instead was took a bunch of techniques that we were using to defend government, so things like protective DNS and some other stuff, and tilted it and said, actually, we're going to try and protect the vaccine supply chain, and actually, we're going to protect the healthcare sector better. And so we ended up protecting about 2 million end users during the pandemic using stuff that we built for government. 5 years ago, we would never even have thought about doing that. But it fundamentally changes how you think about protecting small and medium enterprises. Fundamentally changes how you think about protecting everybody in the country. Fundamentally changes how you think about what is going to happen next. Right? Because, literally the week before, if somebody had have asked me, is state X going to attack this little company? You go, no, don't be daft. Why would they? Like that, overnight, because we have a successful vaccine, now they are a target. And how do you build stuff so that they are prepared, we are prepared, and we can manage national risk? Because in the end, that's what this is all about. My final one. So this is, everybody understands touching the third rail as a phrase. It's like it's the really, really stupid thing you never, never, never do. Never touch the third rail in an underground system because it's live, right? This is a paper by a bunch of very, very well-respected computer scientists, and Ross. Sorry, Ross. I joke, right? Called Bugs in Our Pockets. And it's a security critique of what we've called client-side scanning. So this is, think about an end-to-end encrypted system like WhatsApp and where Facebook's going and all the others are going. How do you do safety on an end-to-end encrypted system when you're thinking about child safety? And one of the things we do today on those systems is look for known child sexual exploitation images. Okay, so there are systems in place today to look for those and put them to moderators, eventually get them to law enforcement so you can arrest bad people. Once you go into end encrypted, obviously you can't do that on the server. And so the logical thing to do is go, I'll just do it on the client. Dead easy. Turns out not, right? And this paper explains some of the reasons why that's a really bad idea. But it also makes the mistake of taking this thing out of context. So think of this. Take Facebook and take iMessage. Okay? Assume they're both end-to-end encrypted, right? Are they the same? They kind of feel the same, right? I can message people, it's encrypted, do groups, I can do stuff, kind of feel the same, right? How do I contact someone on Facebook? Well, I can search for characteristics that they might match. How do I contact someone on iMessage? I need to know their phone number. Right? There's no discovery on iMessage. How do I entice people to my identity? Well, I have a public profile on Facebook. I like things that other people are going to like. Don't do any of that on iMessage. And so the characteristics of the service that the abusers can use are fundamentally different. And so the things you're going to do with those things, those services, the sorts of harm you're trying to manage are fundamentally different. Now, I said the 5G discussion was cartoon. This debate, the end-to-end encryption debate, has just got horrendously bad, right? It's really toxic. And it's not, I don't think it's anybody's fault. I don't think anybody's right or wrong at the moment because the polar positions are so polar, so bad, that we're not having the actual debate we need, which is, actually, this isn't that hard. So think of this. One of the things in here, which is absolutely right, by the way, is how do you make sure that only things that are detected are child sexual exploitation images? That's a real valid attack. How do you make sure that the only things are child sexual exploitation images? So somebody can't put an image of me in the database and pick people up who are sending photos of me around. Not that anybody would want to do that. Right, how do you do it? Right, do you do it with the technology? No, you do it with the ecosystem that curates the database. Right? And that's done by a bunch of global NGOs, a bunch of global non-government organizations, child safety charities. Change how they work to enable the sorts of technology to work in a safer way. Right? You're never going to make it perfect. But what we can do is change this debate from, governments want to balk the entire world, privacy people want to allow children to be abused. Neither of those things are true. No way are they true. And so how do you get to a much more sensible, grown-up, mature, democratic discussion about what the right answer is for this sort of technology? Because it's not chucking rocks at each other. So we've got to fix the underlying discussion. Who knows what? Right? How do you make sure that people like this author list know how child sexual abuse happens online, know how it's currently mitigated, know the sorts of things that are necessary to track people down and put them away? Right? They're the real the killers for this. The whole point of this talk, apart from you to get your hands up and down a few times, is this. Right? In security, it doesn't matter what discipline of security you're in, details really matter. Hyperbole doesn't work. If you don't understand the details of what you're talking about, please shut up. Right? If you don't understand the details of the system that you're trying to change a characteristic of, please step away from the keyboard. Right? Details really, really matter. And it's really, really, really difficult to convince policymakers. And if you're into government, it doesn't matter which government, by the way, in the end, you're going to have to convince a minister. Right? I note this is being recorded. It's going to go on a website. Sam, now's the time to stop. Ministers are not technically competent. Shock. Right? So how you explain stuff to them really, really, really matters. If you can't explain a complicated thing to somebody who is not an expert in your field, you should probably be doing something else. Right? This is really important. Right? Making sure that you can get complex details across to people, whether it's a minister, CEO of a company, or the person sat next to you writing code, doesn't matter. You have to be able to do this in order to get security right. I'm going to talk about one final thing, and then I'm going to shut up and take questions. I think there is a real question about whether we can do cybersecurity in 10 years' time. Right, so there's a set of things happening. So geopolitics of it. You're seeing tech stacks split. You're seeing a balkanization of tech. Right, so there's going to be 2, 3, 4 different competing tech stacks. They're going to have fundamentally different characteristics, fundamentally different values encoded in them. How do I know which one to use? How do I know what those values and what those encodings mean in the context of the UK? How do I make sure that in 10 years' time, so think about this one, here's a good one for you. Today, your primary identity is your physical identity. Your secondary identity is all of your digital identities. So when you lose your digital identity, it's a pain in the bum, but it's not the end of the world. In 10 years' time, it might be the other way around. It may be that you cannot participate in society if you don't have your digital identity. Should we then be in a place where clicking a link is the end of your digital identity? Of course not. Should we then be in a place where some third party having a password of password123 on an admin account can take down a national network? Of course not. Should we be in a place where I have completely obfuscated supply chains, so I have no idea where this bit of black plastic with little legs coming out of it came from? Of course not. So how do we start to build stuff today so that we're not in that position in 10 years' time? It's not by doing what we do today. We have got to fundamentally change how we do security for IT. So to wrap up, these are my 3 takeaways, right? This is my first one. Enough with the dumb stuff. Please, can we not have passwords of password123 anymore? Please, can we not have buffer overflows? Please, 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 can we not do stupid things anymore? And when we do see them, can we please point them out? Because it's the only way you're going to stop people doing dumb stuff. There are still banks in the UK today that in their online banking system will not allow you to use a password manager. Right? Just think that through. They will not allow you to use a password manager because security. Right? Go somewhere else. They're probably leaving your bloody money under a mattress. They're that dumb. Right? I mean, seriously, vote with your feet. If you see dumb, walk away from it. We have got to simplify cybersecurity. We've got to simplify security generally and talk about it in a way that people can understand. Right? If you can't do that, we're never going to win. You're just going to scare people, and scared people don't make good decisions. And we have to sciencify it. I accept I have made a word up. But we've got to put some actual rigor behind cybersecurity instead of gut feeling. A lot of the stuff we do today is still gut feeling. How do you put rigor, science, and evidence behind it? And to be honest, it's not going to be me that sorts that out. It's not going to be Ross that sorts it out. It's going to be you lot. Right? That's your research problem for the next few years. And on that, thank you very much. Any questions?
Thanks, Ian.
It'll just turn on. Give it half a second.
Give it half a second. Okay, who wants to fire off the first question?
Run away. It's fine.
It's green. You have the green.
Hi, Ian. This is Shashir. My question is, do you know of a definition for CSAM?
Sorry, can you take your mask off? I couldn't hear you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do you know a definition for CSAM?
for child sexual abuse material? Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us what it is?
It's in the national strategy. So the
National
National Child Sexual Abuse Strategy, published, there's a definition in there. Might not be perfect, but it's something to start with.
So a definition we can use to build technology over, as opposed to anything else.
So the thing to remember about child sexual abuse is it's not all about images, right? So it's certainly not all about known images. It's about kids actually being harmed today, right? So everybody's heard the NCMEC number, right? So NCMEC's the US clearinghouse. Most of the services are in the US, so most of the reports go to NCMEC. And NCMEC send out about 29.4 million reports. It's not a useful number. The useful number is, last year, UK law enforcement safeguarded 8,000 children in the UK. That's what I'm trying to stop, right? Forget the big numbers, forget the hyperbole. 8,000 kids, 6,000 offenders. How do I stop that? And there's a set of different harms that are caused online. Image exchange is one, grooming, and so on. There's all sorts of things. What we're going to try and do is put something out that explains it so that you can have some better data. It's not data per se, but you can have an understanding about the sorts of things we see and help build technology to fix it.
But for the purposes of for the purposes of client-side scanning, is there a definition of a CSAM image?
For images, yes. Yeah. There's a legal definition.
A technical definition?
Well, no, because it's a judgment. So the problem is it's a judgment, right? But so there is a definition of what is necessary to be an obscene publication, right? But it's a human judgment as to whether a picture of a child is abuse or not, which is part of the problem.
Thank you very much for a really interesting talk. So you've spoken in the past about the kind of myth of the sophisticated attacker. And I'd really like to know, like, kind of how does that inform, I guess, the guidance you give to companies, how you interact with public policy and strategy?
So the myth of the advanced attacker, the myth is nation states only use 0 days, right? Nation states have this army of super hackers in the basement that are finding vulnerabilities left, right, and center. You know, they sit in front of a piece of software and vulnerabilities throw themselves out to be abused, right? It's not true. Most of the stuff we see remains bad credential management, bad network design, and not patching your damn software. They are the 3 main causes of the incidents we see. And it doesn't matter whether it's a nation state, an advanced cybercrime group, or a 14-year-old spotty school kid in their bedroom. Right? They are the 3 things that cause trouble. How do you fix those? Right? That's where you start, because you've got to. It's not about vulnerability management; it's about harm management. And if they're the 3 vulnerabilities that are being used the most often, then try and manage those down. When you do get to 0 days and actually exploits of software vulnerabilities, it's mainly buffer overflows, which is why we went for them first, mainly. So the idea is we change the market. So to try and answer your question, who's bought an internet-connected toaster? No? They exist, really. I bought one to play with it. Consumer IoT, right? So the internet-connected stuff in your house. How do you know it's good? Well, today you don't. So we wrote a standard. We publish the standard, and the standard says things like, no default and changeable passwords. Scary. It says things like, you will have a use-by date for this thing, which is basically, when are you going to guarantee you provide patches until? And so on and so on and so on. And at the end, it has things like, no externally accessible DMA-capable interfaces. Right? It's going to be a while before I get down there. Right? It's going to be a while. First 3, expiry date, vulnerability reporting point, no default passwords, right? They will be coming into law as things that you can be fined for if you sell something in the UK that doesn't meet those 3 things, right? Shift the market. Now, here's where you go, yeah, but the UK, 66 million people, nobody cares, and you'd be 100% correct, which is why India, Vietnam, Singapore, and a bunch of other countries are also doing the same thing with the same standard. So that's how I think you shift things, right? You go, as I said at the start, governments are only useful for a very small number of things. Intervening when there's no commercial incentive is one of them. This is one of those times.
Hi, so clearly NCSC is getting some having some impact on government. You're getting some good laws coming through now. How do we stop the politicians asking for the crazy shit, like backdoors and the private keys for encryption and all that sort of stuff?
That's a decent portion of my life. So I mean, seriously, so this is one of the things, right? If you fancy doing a really hard job for not much money, come into government, right? One of you will be having my job in 10 years' time, right? But it's to do exactly that. So government talks about science and evidence-based policy. And generally speaking, genuinely, they try and do that. The problem is often there's not enough people in government who are competent to give them an evidence-based opinion, right? We happen to be in a good position on cybersecurity, I think, because they will come and ask us. And you might not agree with everything I've said, and you might not agree with everything we do, and that's fine, but at least we're trying. And so I think the thing is about getting external experts into government, either on a rotating basis or on a call-off basis or something, to help explain why I would like to ban encryption is a monumentally stupid thing to say, right? And literally, I end up having those conversations. Other people having those conversations and having roughly the same argument as to why it's dumb would only be a good thing. DCMS have put out an advert for a college of experts. So Tom Rodden, the chief scientific advisor there, has put out an advert for a college of experts to try and do exactly that. How can he have a call-off list of people who he can go to and go, okay, I've got a question on synthetic biology. Right, nothing to do with this. Who the hell do I go talk to? Right, that we're genuinely trying to get more expertise into government, and doing it through the civil service is hard.
Hi, I'm Jahangir. I'm a master's student in cybersecurity here. And then I was going to ask you, you said one of the points you made were about simplifying cybersecurity. That's one of the key aspects going forward. Do you think, what steps are the NCSA taking to try and achieve that in the future? And I'm trying to think in terms of schools. Do you think that's quite important to educate them from a young age? Or startup organisations, what kind of stuff are you doing to ensure that these kind of people get this simplified information across? Because otherwise they just become bombarded with all this cybersecurity information and end up not giving a care about it.
Couldn't agree more. So I'll give you an answer in 3 parts, I think. Yeah, 3 parts. So the first one is there's 66 million people there today who need advice they can consume. And we've simplified it as far as we possibly can. So there's something called Cyber Aware, which is a big government campaign that got launched a couple of weeks ago. And it's basically, instead of saying, don't click a link unless you trust the link, right, which is dumb, or have a different password for every service, change it every 29.4 days, make it 76 characters long, which is dumb. There's 6 simple behaviors, right? Use a password manager. Use 2-step verification on your email account or any other important account you can. Have a different address, password for your email account to everything else, because all password resets go there. Backup, antivirus, and so on and so on, right? It's on the website. 6 things that people can do, and we've even done videos for things like how to set a PIN on your mobile phone, right? So that's number 1. That's about as simple as I can make it. Skills. It's broken. Fundamentally broken. So you look at the education system, a lot of kids fall out of STEM subjects, 13-ish. We've had something called Cyber First going for 10 years. And that was intended to, A, get more people into cybersecurity, but B, try and fix the diversity problem, to try and get more girls into cybersecurity at sort of 13. And we've been brilliant. I mean, I say it's 300% more girls do computer science A-level today than when we started. It's less than 5% of the number of girls that do chemistry every year. Right, so we've had precisely no material impact. And the reason is because back at 11, that pipeline starts to fall down. And so we have to fix that. Right, we have to fix it as government. Government has to fix the education system around STEM. Absolutely has to. And then startups, NCSC for startups. Clues in the name. Right, we have an accelerator, and we bring people in. They competition, we do themes, we do 10, 20 a year, something like that. And we try and help them. So they get to talk to our techies. And again, you can argue whether that's useful or not. We introduce them to investors. We try and get them target markets so they can do proof of principles. all of that sort of thing to try and help people build new capabilities for the UK. Now, that's one agency, right? NCSC is 1,000 people, give or take, right? Not going to fix everything with 1,000 people, but you could all do it, right? You take the cyber aware stuff and talk to everybody you know and your family, get them to do it, make my job a hell of a lot easier, right? Talk to kids, go to schools, help teachers build interesting computer science related curricula for their kids, because the government doesn't have anything today, right? How can you help? You can go and do this, right? You all know stuff. You can go teach. Go teach. Ran over, sorry.
So, first of all, thank you very much for the very, very nice and enticing talk. So the question I have, and also perhaps a bit of a general point, is a worry I have that as a field in cybersecurity, we're glorifying attacks a lot. And this is something that we've seen over time. It's not clear it's getting us somewhere. I mean, so the strategy, so what I'm worried is like that if our strategy is that we're going to make you embarrassed for a security vulnerability, and then we're going to laugh at your, just pointing to the first point you made, right? So what I'm wondering is whether we should start shifting seriously the weight from pointing and laughing at, you know, the security vulnerabilities that exist and searching for the next attack. We should seriously go to the last point that you made, and I was very glad that you finished with that, about sciencifying basically our field. That would be really interesting to see, because it seems we've tried the first approach quite a lot. We laughed a lot, and it doesn't seem to get much better, or at least they only get a little better.
So I disagree. So I don't think we've tried pointing and laughing at the right people.
Okay.
Right? So if you think about what cybersecurity professionals say, they say the user is the weakest link. Right? So we're pointing at the people who have the biggest burden and the least skill and going, it's all your fault. Right? And it absolutely is not. We've said for years, the user is the strongest link. They are my first and last line of defense. Right? So the reason that users have a hard time is not because they're stupid, it's because we give them technology they cannot possibly use well. Right? So the people I want to point and laugh at are the people that should know better. So when somebody stands up and goes, hello, I'm a cyber expert, I write perfect code, I'd like to point and laugh. I'd like all of you to point and laugh. When somebody stands up and goes, don't worry, we know how to do security for our telecoms networks, and it turns out they haven't updated OpenSSL since 1996, I want to point and laugh. Right? It's the objective, simple things that are easy to fix, because that's how you raise the bar. I do not want to point and laugh at people who've written code that have a security vulnerability in it, because they're all going to have security vulnerabilities in them. Right? I want to point and laugh at the ones that lie. I want to point and laugh at the ones that engender fear in order to sell a product. I want to point and laugh at the ones that blame the poor users who have no hope of doing this. We're asking them to do impossible things. They're the ones I want to point and laugh at. That's how you fix the market, and I think that's how you fix the incentives.
Thanks. That's a very important distinction. Thanks.
Sorry, I
Thanks
probably
for
wasn't
making
clear.
Okay, last words, Tammy.
Ah, yeah, wonderful getting lost. I was going to chase this one a little bit. When I saw the point and laugh thing, it reminded me strongly of kind of two different things I've seen out of the US. One of them was to start publicly announcing breaches, which I think worked beautifully, or at the very least, it suddenly made it possible for all the journalists to find news stories very easily, and made them very happy, and made some of the companies very much less happy, but incentivized them. And I think that was quite interesting. And then the other example comes from the Federal Trade Commission in the US, who effectively kind of mandated privacy policies. Because basically they said, well, if you don't have a privacy policy, then you must be engaging in unfair and deceptive trade practice, and that's a bad thing. We're going to come and fine you. And if you do have the privacy policy and we can prove that you breached your own privacy policy, that is also unfair and deceptive trade practice, and we will come and fine you. However, I don't even need to look at the audience behind me. How many of you actually have read most of the privacy policies on any of the web pages you've been to? Cool. And also, can anyone understand those even if you do? And so I'm kind of curious between these two outcomes where you see this one kind of landing.
So I would challenge you on mandatory reporting to start with. So as I say, we've been doing large-scale, national-scale incident response for 6 years now. We think mandatory reporting is not a good idea. We certainly think public reporting is a terrible idea. Right? The reason is you don't get to manage the harm. Right? So remember, when you're doing an incident response, what you're trying to do is manage the harm. You're trying to reduce the attacker's ability to cause impact, both across time and across capability, and then try and find out how they got in and make sure nobody else is vulnerable in the same way. Right? If you have a thing that says, within 72 hours, you must report an incident, you fundamentally change the value proposition of that. There's something on our website that says, we are not a regulator. We will not dob you into your regulator if you come and talk to us. So if you come and tell us something, we will not tell your regulator that you are dumb. We'll strongly encourage you to do so, but we won't do it. And the reason for that is to make sure that people will come to us, right? Because it's all about reducing harm. And so, yeah, so intuitively, mandatory reporting sounds like a great idea. In our view, it would cause more harm than it fixes. So that's the first one. The FTC thing's brilliant, right? And I agree totally. Nobody reads privacy policies and end-user license agreements or anything like that. But that's why you need to take the problem away from them. The burden is in the wrong place. And so all the things that I've been talking about, what we're trying to do is move the burden to where people can actually manage it. And that's, generally speaking, not the public. Right? And so to give a really quick example, you've all been told, don't click a link in an email unless you trust the email. Yeah? Everybody's been told that. Yes? Seriously, wake up. Yes, you've all been told that. How many of you know how to trust an email? Right, so a few people in this audience of experts, a few people could probably read the internet headers and make a judgment about whether that's a real email or not, a malicious email or not. Yeah? It's maybe a handful in this audience. I can do it when I'm sober. Right? I cannot do it when I've had a few pints. I know because I've tried. It was an interesting experiment. So, as a piece of advice, how is that remotely sensible to give to the public? It's not. So what we did instead was say, hey, if you're worried about something for whatever reason, right, send it to us, and we will go and investigate and take down the bad stuff if there is bad stuff linked to it. Right, it's called the Suspicious Email Reporting Tool. You send it to report@phishing.gov.uk. We launched it 18 months ago, something like that. We've had 10.5 million reports from the British public. 10.5 million dodgy emails, right? Those emails led to 76,000 unique campaigns being taken down, cybercrime campaigns, right? And the interesting thing is those 76,000, the public were the first time we saw it. So we've got a big takedown pipeline. It's published in the active cyber defense stuff. We take down about 200,000 campaigns a year. Those 76,000 we didn't spot any other way other than the public. And so for me, that changes the burden on the public, right? Instead of going, I don't know whether to click this link or not, I don't know what to do, send it to us. One person sends it, everybody's protected. And so again, scaling the impact and reducing the burden on the people who can least well handle it is the way to do this for me.
Great. Oh, you've given us a huge amount to think about, Ian. And assuming that one of the recordings at least worked for most of, then future generations will also be able to look this up, and so will people elsewhere on the internet. So one of the wonders of modern technology is that we can scale up education as well. So finally, I'd like us all to thank Ian for what was a very, very thought-provoking lecture. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.